Nintendo Directs have been Nintendo's primary method of announcing info about their games for the past 15 years. And in honor of the leaks rumoring a Nintendo Direct next month, I ranked all of the Nintendo Switch era Directs on a tier list based on which ones I like the best. Now before we get started, I've made a couple of rules for this ranking. First of all, I'm only going to be ranking the Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2 era Directs. And second of all, I'm not going to be ranking any game-specific Directs or Nintendo Direct partner showcases. With those rules out of the way, let's jump right into the video. First on the list, we have the Nintendo Switch presentation that aired in January of 2017. This is where the Nintendo Switch was officially unveiled and shown off. And with the Nintendo Switch, several games were announced. Some of the highlights of this presentation were the announcement of Splatoon 2, Super Mario Odyssey, and the announcement that The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild would be launching on Nintendo Switch along with the Wii U version. With just those announcements alone, I think it's pretty clear why I'm putting the Nintendo Switch presentation in the S tier. The next Nintendo Direct on the list is from April of 2017. This is the first of what I would call the professional Nintendo Directs. It was pretty clear with this presentation that Nintendo was taking Nintendo Directs as a whole much more seriously than in the Wii U era. So just for that, this Nintendo Direct gets a couple of extra points. Now, as you might expect from a Nintendo Direct that only took place 3 months after a system presentation, there aren't any new games that were announced at this Direct, with just some updates on ARMS, Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, and Splatoon 2. But because this presentation revolutionized the Nintendo Direct model, I'll give it a place in the B tier. Next we have the Nintendo Direct E3 Spotlight of 2017. Again, this presentation aired very shortly after the April Nintendo Direct, and there weren't too many games announced. The only real games announced were Kirby Star Allies and Yoshi's Crafted World, both of which are pretty underwhelming games. There was the infamous Metroid Prime 4 announcement where Nintendo would take about 7 years to actually show a trailer of this game. But because this tease was pretty uninformative and all of the other info announced wasn't that exciting, I'll give the Nintendo Direct Spotlight of E3 2017 a place in the D tier. Nintendo Direct September of 2017. In a predictable fashion, the September of 2017 Nintendo Direct didn't announce anything new at all. Instead, this Direct focused on games that had already been announced but weren't quite released yet. These games included Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Splatoon 2, Kirby Star Allies, and Super Mario Odyssey. But for me personally, I don't like any of these games that much, so this Direct goes in the D tier. Next up, we have the Nintendo Direct mini presentation in January of 2018. This was the first Nintendo Direct mini of the Nintendo Switch era, and as you would expect, this Direct was shorter than the general Nintendo Directs. But what's interesting about this presentation is it mostly cut out any third-party announcements, meaning this particular Direct was effectively shorter but still had the same amount of first-party Nintendo games. Unlike late 2017, which was pretty lackluster in the game announcements department, this Nintendo Direct actually announced 2 games, Mario Tennis Aces and a port of Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze. There was also more info on Kirby Star Allies and an update for Super Mario Odyssey introducing Balloon World. Considering that this was a Nintendo Direct mini, I think A tier suits this Nintendo Direct the best. Nintendo Direct March of 2018. Given that Nintendo had announced quite a few games at the Nintendo Direct mini in January and E3 was pretty close to this Nintendo Direct, it wouldn't shock me if there weren't too many announcements at the March of 2018 Nintendo Direct. And if you were thinking that, you would be right. There were only 2 new announcements at this Nintendo Direct, the first being a port of Captain Toad Treasure Tracker to the Switch with new Super Mario Odyssey themed levels. But additionally, at the very end of this Direct, Nintendo pulled off one of the most legendary announcements. Basically out of nowhere, Nintendo just announced the next Smash game, and while I don't personally play Smash Bros, I gotta admit that this is one of the most legendary announcements at a Nintendo Direct. Direct. Nintendo Direct March of 2018 gets a place in the A tier. Nintendo Direct E3 of 2018. Remember that Smash tease I just talked about a moment ago? Well, this E3 Direct was mainly focused on the new Smash game, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And if you know Masahiro Sakurai, you know that his presentations are really long. So besides an announcement of Super Mario Party, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate basically took over this E3 Direct. But because I like Mario Party, this Direct goes in the B tier. Nintendo Direct September of 2018. This is one of the best Nintendo Directs that Nintendo had aired in a while at this point. First of all, they opened the Direct with Luigi's Mansion 3. I really like Luigi's Mansion 3 and I think it's pretty underrated, so this already carries this Direct. Then they announced another Wii U port with New Super Mario Bros. U, but the deluxe version for Switch. This included both Mario and Luigi U, two separate games. However, this was also the Nintendo Direct where Nintendo started their Switch Online service. Now as of 2025, I think Switch Online is an incredible value, but back when Nintendo Switch Online launched in 2018, there was barely any value to justify $20 a year. All that Switch Online had to offer at launch was online play, which was free up until that point. Save Data Cloud was also present at launch, which basically allows you to transfer your data into the cloud so that if your system breaks, you can recover your data. There was also a tiny library of NES games available on demand, an online app to call your friends even though you would just use your phone anyway. Finally, Nintendo also promised special offers for Nintendo Switch Online members. Which sounds nice until you realize that there were no offers at the launch of Switch Online, and even today, there are barely any offers available. So Switch Online does bring this Direct down a little bit, but Switch Online has become better as the years have progressed. This Direct also had an Animal Crossing tease. First of all, Nintendo said that Isabelle would be in Smash Ultimate, but more importantly, Nintendo also teased that Animal Crossing would come out in 2019, which was later postponed to 2020, but at least we had an announcement. Overall, this Direct lands in the A tier. Nintendo Direct February of 2019. Nintendo announced Super Mario Maker 2 and The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening at this Direct. C tier. Next up was the E3 2019 Nintendo Direct. In this Direct, we got some more info on Luigi's Mansion 3 and The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, both of which would make this a solid Direct. However, Nintendo also announced the next Animal Crossing game by actually showing footage with Animal Crossing New Horizons. Not only that, but at this Direct, Nintendo announced that the sequel to Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was in development. All of these announcements earned this Direct a place in the A tier. Next up, we have the Nintendo Direct that aired in September of 2019. In my opinion, this Direct was pretty average. Several games that were previously announced like Luigi's Mansion 3, The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, and Animal Crossing New Horizons got new trailers. But the only new game that was announced was Super Kirby Clash, which is a free-to-play game that kind of relies on microtransactions and it really isn't a full game. However, at this Direct, Nintendo did announce that SNES games would be added to Switch Online, which really helped the service feel like it was more valuable. So overall, I'll put this Direct in the B tier because plenty of previously announced games got new trailers. The next Nintendo Direct was a Nintendo Direct Mini that aired in March of 2020. Besides the Super Mario Bros. 35th Anniversary Direct, which aired in September of 2020, this Nintendo Direct Mini was the only Nintendo Direct in 2020 to announce first-party games. And considering that this was the only general Direct that announced first-party games, you would expect plenty of games to have been announced. Well, not exactly, because the only new first-party games that were announced were Good Job and Clubhouse games. Now personally, I love Clubhouse games. I think it's a really underrated game, and I've played Good Job through, and I think it's pretty fun. But only these two games make this Direct extremely weak, especially if we're comparing it to the Nintendo Direct Mini from January of 2018. So overall, this Nintendo Direct Mini goes in the D tier. Nintendo Direct February of 2021. At this point, it had been over a year since the last general Direct had aired, so there were plenty of new games that were announced at this Direct. Firstly, Mario Golf Super Rush was announced at this Direct, and while I don't think that it's the greatest game ever, it's definitely still a solid game. Then Nintendo announced a Miitopia port, a port of Skyward Sword, and Splatoon 3. There was also an announcement of an update that added Super Mario items to Animal Crossing New Horizons. So overall, I give this Direct a place in the A tier. Nintendo Direct E3 of 2021. This one goes in the S tier. This Direct feels like it hogged all of the announcements that Nintendo meant to announce in 2020. Firstly, they announced Mario Party Superstars, which is in my opinion one of the best Mario Party games. Then they announced Metroid Dread, and while it wasn't Metroid Prime 4, it was definitely something. There was also a new WarioWare game announced with WarioWare Get It Together, a Legend of Zelda version of the Game & Watch, and the first trailer of the sequel to Breath of the Wild, which was later renamed to Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. I think this Direct deserves a place in the S tier because if you announce a Mario Party game and show the first trailer of the sequel to Breath of the Wild, it's already a win for me. Next up is the Nintendo Direct that aired in September of 2021. Unlike the E3 Direct that announced a lot of new games, this one just made a lot of new trailers for them, which I'm totally okay with. We got some new trailer footage of Mario Party Superstars, Animal Crossing New Horizons, Metroid Dread, and Splatoon 3. This was also the Direct where Nintendo announced the Switch Online Plus expansion pack where they added N64 games and Sega Genesis games. There weren't too many to start with, similar to when Switch Online first came out, but it was definitely nice to see. This was also the Nintendo Direct where Nintendo announced the cast for the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Overall, the September of 2021 Nintendo Direct gets a place in the A tier. Next up, we have the Direct that aired in February of 2022. This Direct announced Mario Strikers Battle League, which is considered to be one of the worst first-party games on Switch. But Nintendo more than made up for it by announcing Nintendo Switch Sports and the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. Personally, I really like Nintendo Switch Sports, despite a lot of people not liking it that much. I know compared to Wii Sports and Wii Sports Resort, it's not as good, but the games in there are still really fun to break out and play. As for the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, this introduced 48 new tracks and later added a lot of characters. It might as well have been its own game because 48 tracks is a lot. And in my opinion, for $25, this is one of the best deals on any video game that you could get. So overall, this Direct gets a place in the B tier. Nintendo Direct September of 2022. By this time, E3 was basically dead, so Nintendo did not have a June Direct for E3. Instead, they held a partner showcase, which doesn't qualify to be on my list, so we're skipping straight to the September General Direct. And you can tell Nintendo had a lot of announcements stored up. In this Direct, Nintendo showed off a new trailer for Splatoon 3, they announced that N64 Switch Online would get new games, they showed an update for Mario Strikers Battle League, they announced Wave 3 of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, they announced the golf update for Nintendo Switch Sports, and they finally named the sequel to The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, calling it The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Finally, Nintendo also announced 2 new games at this Direct, with Pikmin 4 and Kirby's Return to Dreamland Deluxe. A tier. Nintendo Direct February of 2023. At this Nintendo Direct, Nintendo just announced more updates on Pikmin 4, they showed off the next wave of the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass, and they showed more footage of The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom. Usually that would be a C tier Direct for me, but Nintendo did also announce that Game Boy and Game Boy Advance games would be added to Switch Online and Switch Online Plus expansion pack respectively, and they also announced the DLC for Splatoon 3, as well as Metroid Prime Remastered. So I'll put this Direct in the B tier. Next up, we have the Nintendo Direct from June of 2023. To my knowledge, this is the first time Nintendo had a Nintendo Direct in June, and it wasn't called an E3 Direct. And boy, did Nintendo cook with this Direct. Firstly, as you would expect, there was a new trailer for Pikmin 4 and a new trailer for the Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. But besides that, all of the announcements at this Direct were brand new. Nintendo started off with announcing 3 games in a row. First, there's a remaster of Super Mario RPG. Now, I'm not personally into RPGs, but I know that this was a big deal. Then they announced a new Princess Peach game, which would later be named Princess Peach Showtime, and they announced that Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon would be getting an HD upgrade for Nintendo Switch, which at that time was also nameless, but it was later named Luigi's Mansion 2 HD. Then Nintendo announced a WarioWare game that was motion controlled with WarioWare Move It. Finally, Nintendo announced the first 2D Mario game in over 10 years, and Super Mario Bros. Wonder was going to be its name. And with all these new announcements, it only makes sense that this Direct goes in the S tier. Next, we have the Nintendo Direct from September of 2023. This Direct is pretty simple. It basically just showed updates of the games that were announced in the June Direct, including Super Mario RPG, Princess Peach Showtime, Luigi's Mansion 2 HD, and WarioWare Move It. It did show off a remaster of Mario vs. Donkey Kong from the Game Boy Advance and a remaster of Paper Mario Thousand Year Door from the GameCube. But because no brand new games were announced, I'm putting this Direct in the C tier. Next was the only general Nintendo Direct in 2024, likely because the Switch 2 was on the horizon. And this Direct aired in June of 2024. Finally, after 7 years, this showed the first footage of Metroid Prime 4, now renamed Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. This game is promising a 2025 release date, and as of right now, it hasn't come out yet, but it's probably going to come out soon. Nintendo did announce a couple of new games at this Direct, with Mario and Luigi Brothership, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD, which is a port, Super Mario Party Jamboree, and The Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom. It's a little bit disappointing considering that this was the only main Direct of 2024, but I still give this a place in the A tier. Nintendo Direct March of 2025. This Direct aired about 1 week before the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, and it's the last Nintendo Switch 1 Direct. Besides a new Metroid Prime 4 Beyond trailer, there weren't too many games announced at this Direct. There was some footage of Pokemon Legends ZA, and if you're wondering why I haven't brought up Pokemon in this Direct, it's because I'm not a Pokemon fan. But at the very end, Nintendo did the unexpected. Tomodachi Life, Living the Dream. And honestly, it feels like I'm living a dream that they actually announced that, because Tomodachi Life fans have been asking for a sequel to Tomodachi Life for years, and this Direct, Nintendo actually announced a new Tomodachi Life game completely out of nowhere. But because there are so few announcements at this March of 2025 Direct, I'm putting it in the B tier. And finally, we have the Nintendo Switch 2 Direct, which aired in April of 2025. This Direct unveiled the Nintendo Switch 2, but it also announced several new games. The new first-party games were Mario Kart World, Dragon Drive, Kirby Air Riders, and Donkey Kong Bonanza. There were also several Switch 2 Edition games announced which upgrade the graphics and add new content exclusively for Nintendo Switch 2, but they use Switch 1 games. There was a Switch 2 edition for Super Mario Party Jamboree announced, a Switch 2 edition for The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, a Switch 2 edition for Kirby and the Forgotten Land, a Switch 2 edition for Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, and more. I don't even have to say it, but this Direct goes in the S tier. And that wraps up this ranking. What do you think of my tier list? Let me know down in the comments, and I would really appreciate if you would like this video and subscribe to the channel. But anyway, thanks for watching, and have a great day.